There it is.
Okay, thank you very much to everyone who is joining us here tonight for this soul session sponsored by Creative Life Center of Spring, Texas. Again, thank you so much for joining us. We are going to have a live organic discussion tonight about race. Each of us, or whomever gets a chance to share, will be speaking about our own personal experiences as a, well, we're all women of color in this particular discussion. And so we're going to talk about that. And the conversation really goes where it goes. And right now, we don't know exactly where that is. What we do know is that it will be perfect. And so to get us started will be Neil Kay, and she will introduce herself as she describes her experiences of, or some of her experiences of being who she is and showing up in her own skin wherever she may be at the time.
Thank you, PJ. Well, let me say I've recently had conversations about my heritage because I am mixed Black or African American and Japanese. And recently heard a term that is very interesting to consider, to be a person of third culture people. And that was generally applied to those of us who grew up in the military. So I have that too, because we were people who traveled around and were integrated into various cultures in different countries as a result of military service. So I guess I'm a double third culture person just by virtue of being a mixed person and mixed culturally, Japanese and American, as well as that military influence of never really having a home. I met a poet once who was also a military dependent. And one of the things she said that really made me understand the difficulty of the life that I had grown up in was that after traveling around so much, she thought all of the people she knew in the world ever had died. And I realized when she said that, that was my experience, because you never see these people that you get close to. And every 4 years, you're moving to a different country or a different state or a different base. And so you lose people. And so it's kind of an ungrounded existence in terms of having a community that you grew up with. So it's in a way very difficult, but it's also very rich. And it's trying to find a balance in that richness, especially racially, because it's hard to fit in being different, not only because of where you grew up, but also because of growing up in two different cultures. And you're never enough for either one. So even in the Japanese culture, I've never been enough. And African American culture, I've never been enough. So I like to think of myself as a double, because I have double the richness, double the culture, and double the ethnicity. So I can move in the world any way I want to, even as it may not be well received. It's something that I claim for myself so I can continue to walk with confidence and a sense of joy about who I am. But it's taken a long time to get here. And it's something I think that all of us tend to go through as we're trying to grow up and into who we are meant to be. So that's it for me right now.
Could you explain or just describe some of the painful experiences you encountered when you were growing up, or how white people perceived you if you moved in that world? What was it like growing up being Black and Japanese? I know, how did people look at you? What kinds of things did you hear them saying about you? What kinds of things did they say to you that you recall? Particularly, again, some of the most painful.
I think the most painful were around my family, um, because I remember my dad taught us to box when we were like 5 or 6 years old. So my brother and I were always in the boxing ring together. And he always said that you just might need this one day. And it never occurred to me that it was something that would be useful, but it was, because one of my earliest fights was when I was 8 years old and uh, had to help my brother who was fighting someone else. And his bigger brother came to fight my brother. So I came to fight the little brother, that kind of thing. But as I got older, I remember going to the movies with my two younger sisters to see Chubby Checkers Twist Around the Clock, that really old movie. And we were followed from the theater by three young white girls who were yelling at us to go back to Africa. And I was just outraged that they were saying this stuff in front of my sisters. And so we had a big fist fight and I was winning because I knew how to fight and it wasn't like girl fight. And so the man whose lawn we were on came out with a shotgun and pointed it at me because I was winning, and just scattered everybody because there was a huge crowd around. So that was a very painful experience. It was also one that I never told my parents because I knew I would get in trouble. Later on, I had another one in high school on the bus because someone called my mother a whore, and because they said that she married my father so she could come to this country. So I had another fight, which I also won. And I was very proud to win, actually. And so I was supposed to be kicked out of school, but my father came down, and I never saw a person overcome with such fear as when the vice principal saw my father. The blood drained from his face because my dad was a heavyweight boxer. So he was big and he was Black, and he came in there with fire. So it ended up, I didn't get kicked off the bus or out of school. The other young woman did because he backed me up 100%. So those are the things I remember, some of the fights I had. And the painful experience of having people say those things or say, well, you're not like the rest of them, you're almost white. And many times I have been classified as white because they didn't know what to put, but I still don't know why they chose white, because I know I don't look white, but I guess I was white enough to be maybe Hawaiian or something that fits somewhere in someone's category. So yeah, some of those were extremely painful. And indeed, the one about the shotgun, it took me many, many years to realize the source of my fear against guns and things like that was because of that encounter. And I don't think that came up until I started working in anti-racism training. It was one of the experiences that woke me up to the deeper histories that I had buried and kept away from myself because they were too painful.
Well, I'm not exactly the moderator, we're supposed to be having an open discussion here. So if anybody else wants to jump in with questions or comments, then feel free. Maybe somebody else wants to talk about your experience of being Black in America, or I guess I can talk since I'm already running my mouth. Um, I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I was never really taught that I was Black because everybody around me was Black. I didn't know any white people. And so I guess when I was about 5 or so, me and my mom went downtown on the bus, and she never really taught us that we were different. So she just said, "Come on, baby, we need to sit back here." Now, I was born in 53, and I don't care who knows. Um, I'm not trying to hide anything like that while we're here, but segregation was still very much alive and well in Knoxville. And so we had to go to the back of the bus. And so we sat back there, we rode back there. When we got downtown, there were signs, colored drink here. There was a colored designated restroom where we had to go. And she would just say, "Come on, we're going to go in here." And, I saw the signs and I knew that things were separated, but I had no idea why. And then we came back. Everybody at my school, at my church, all the doctors, all of the nurses, the professionals, everybody was Black. So I didn't know I was colored. And I think up until I went to high school, we had one white girl in my high school, and they called that integrated. So that was different too. And I went to the worst high school in Knoxville, and Tennessee was number 49 out of the 50 states
Mhm.
for education. So we said always, "Thank God for Mississippi," or we would have been number 50. So, which is pretty bad. So, and the rude and abrupt awakening came when I went to college. I went to an all-white Presbyterian school. I was the only Black female in my class. There was one male, and I think out of about 1,500 students, maybe 25 of us were Black. So I didn't have anybody to date. I didn't care to date the Black guy who was part of my class or any of the other Black guys who went to college with me. Um, just didn't have an experience like that. Was never invited to be a part of any of the sororities, or didn't much get to invitations to the parties. The white guys wanted to date me, but they didn't want their parents to know they wanted to date me. So if their parents ever came to college, they didn't want to be seen with me, and I didn't want to have any part of that. One really painful experience I remember is when I was a cheerleader. I used to be on the squad just so I could travel around with the team, and I saw a lot of things. And we went to Birmingham and played a school there. And I remember vividly one of the other cheerleaders on the opposing team pointed to me and said, "Oh, they got an N word on their squad." And, and she said it with her Birmingham accent. And I don't think she really cared that I heard that. And, you know, I didn't know how to react to that. Should I confront her and talk to her about that? Or should I just let it ride because I was outnumbered on both sides? There was just me. So I just kind of let it go. And, and it was painful because of the way I grew up. There not really being any difference. Now, I will say that I did spend some time in Israel. And when I lived in Israel, I worked at the Ben Gurion University of the Negev. And bringing my cultural heritage to Israel was my baggage more than it was on the part of the Israelis. Um, I remember when I went to get the job I went into the library to apply for the job. not knowing there was really an opening. I just thought, oh, maybe I can work at the university. And I got off the bus and went into the library at the university, just being divinely guided to do that. And so I asked in Hebrew if they had any openings there, and they just, and they were laughing. And I'm thinking, oh, they must be laughing at me because I'm a Black woman. Um, and then they asked me where I was from. And I told them, in anger, I'm from the United States. And, and then they said, where in the United States? Knoxville, Tennessee. By then I was just, oh, I could wring your neck. And they said, because you speak Hebrew with a Southern accent. So I just thought that was bizarre and kind of funny, but it wasn't a racial attack. The the most, I guess, gratifying thing I learned about being in a different country was that I was accepted first for who I am and what I brought to the table. And then secondly, I was a Black woman. So not having the cultural legacy of being African American and the cultural legacy of being part of an enslaved people here in this country in Israel was very different, except for the American Israelis. And they had a name for the N word. They called us Cushy Bom Bom there, which was very, very, very different. So, I think racism is not only a cultural phenomenon that we experience here in this country. I do think it's something that people of color experience everywhere. So I think at the end of the day, we all want to be seen, to be heard for who we are, not what we are. And more, I'm growing to see that people, just people, are defying categorization. I look at people these days, like right now, I'm visiting in Boston. And the other day, I saw a repairman and I looked at him and I thought, now, what is he? When really, I'm questioning myself now. Why am I trying to categorize this man? I'm looking at him. He's got really kinky, curly hair, very light skin, uh, different features that are more like mine than a white man. He speaks with a Boston accent, so I can't tell there. Why do I even need to categorize him in the first place? Why can't he just be a man, a person? When are we going to drop these labels trying to figure out what people are and put them in a category before we allow them to be a person? And thank you for hearing me out.
Well, I tell you what, PJ, it's funny that you say that because, of course, being a little younger than you guys, I was born in 78. Next month, I'll be 44 years old. And with that, most of my racist experiences have been from the Black community because I don't fit into the Black narrative. I don't speak the way I'm supposed to speak. I don't dress the way I'm supposed to dress. I don't fall into those stereotypes of what they think I should look like and be like and sound like. And so, because of that, even though all through elementary school, well, no, not high school. High school is where I started experiencing other cultures and being with other people. But elementary and middle school, it was all Black classes. Again, very similar, although I had white teachers, white doctors. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. So people in authority were always white or Caucasian. It wasn't until later on, I went to a small Catholic school and we had Black nuns, Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament, that came in and taught us. I want to say I might have been in 4th or 5th grade when they came to our school. And so that was the first time I had Black teachers, which was so refreshing to me. And it was so wonderful to be taught. But I always knew I was Black. There was never a question for me. Like, I don't remember a time when I did not know that I was Black. It's always been there. It was always known in my family, you know, from my family is an eclectic mix. We have people that are so light that they could definitely pass for white, all the way to people that are so dark, you know, they're considered blue black. So I don't know who knows that term, but if your skin is dark enough, you're so dark that you're considered blue black. My grandfather on my dad's side was very dark complected, had very strong African-like features, as did all of his brothers and sisters. And my grandmother was extremely light, had very fair complexion, very light features, and at one point even passed for white when she was working as a seamstress because she had to work and she had to feed her kids. And so that's one of the things that she did for a brief period of time. And so with that, all of my cousins and I, we were different spectrums, different colors. But with that, it was always a matter of, oh, you are not one of us because you don't talk the way we talk. Oh, you think you're too smart. Oh, you think you're too much. Oh, you think you're too good. This, when it's like, I didn't think any of these things. I don't know why people thought that I thought these things, but they did. And so it was a matter of, especially Black females, you know, and we're talking about early teenage years and girls not letting you be a part of their clique, not letting you be a part of their group because you're not one of us, because you think you're too much, or you think, or you're not, you don't fit in with us. So I've had racist experiences from outside. As a matter of fact, I recall one time when a group of white boys were passing me on bicycles. I was waiting at a bus stop, and one of them spit on me and called me the N-word. I didn't know why. I mean, I'm like, I'm just standing here. What did I do to you guys? But, you know, so I've had that. We had one time when we were, a group of us, we had gotten lost. We were going to a fair at another school, got lost. We asked a gentleman for directions. He would not look at us. He would not, he was an older white man, would not even acknowledge our existence, almost looked through me, which that was the first time I'd experienced something like that. So it's not that I never experienced racism from other people, but at the same time, it was within our community and in our culture. And again, it's, if you're going to be in this group, you have to fit into this box. And because of the way you talk, because of the way you wear your hair, because of the way you dress, you don't fit into our box. So therefore, you should not be here. And we are going to exclude you. So that happened to me more times than a little bit. It really did. Denise, you're muted.
Unmute.
I'm sorry that you guys have gone through the experiences that you had. I too have faced racism, and it's been from both ends, just like Danielle was from the community, and just like you guys, it was also outside of the community. So I know that feeling of not fitting anywhere. As far as within the community, it was the same thing, Danielle. You talk so proper. You don't sound Black. It got to the point that my stepsister, when she came to live with us, there was a girl in her class that she didn't like, and she would always make me call her. And I was like, why do I have to call her? And she would take the phone from me once I dialed the number and asked to speak to this girl. And her excuse was, because you sound white, you know? So I experienced that. The other thing, growing up, it used to bother me that my mother, to me as a child, was such an angry woman all the time. And so I grew up with this image of the angry Black woman, and I never understood why she was so angry all the time until I became grown. And then I realized she was constantly, as my cousin said, fighting for her rights on things. And I noticed with myself that I was doing the same thing. My problem was I'm like 4'11", and so I never knew, was it because people really didn't see me because I was so short, or was it the fact that I was Black? And the experience I had a couple of times was I would be standing in line, and sure enough, a white person would just cut right in front of me. And at first I would, say, well, they're elderly, or maybe they didn't see me. But at one particular incident, the guy said next, and I walked up and he asked me if I was next. And I said I was. And then he asked the woman behind me, were you in line? And she said yes. And before I knew it, I became my mother, that angry Black woman. And I was like, why do you have to ask her? You said next, I stepped up. You asked me if I was next. I told you yes. What, you need verification from a white person that you can finally serve me? So I went through some years of that angry Black woman type. And as far as school, I had mixed incidents, like for some weird reason, it was during integration. And sure enough, all the Black boys, they always were looking at the white girls in the class. And so I didn't pay any attention. And then finally, a white boy in the class started liking me. And I still feel sorry for that boy to this day, because he admitted to the Black boys that he did like me. And the next thing I know, they chased him after school and beat him up. So the next time a white guy, and I have no idea why, but white men tend to like me. The next time a white guy showed an interest, I said, I distinctly remember being in middle school. I said, are you crazy? Do you want to die? And that was the end of that. So got messages early on, stay with your group or stay in your group. And then stories that my grandmother would tell me, things like, because they accepted that I was moving on and moving into a different era, going to school with white kids, because I would get invited to their homes to spend a night and stuff, but I would never invite them over to my home because it would make my grandparents feel uncomfortable and things like that. And so there'd be different stories that my grandmother would tell me, well, watch out for this, because, as long as you're around them, they're okay. But when you're not, you never know what they say or what they do. And I've experienced that too. After college, I had a friend that I borrowed some money from, and I needed to pay them back. And I'm not good at math. And I just remember him making the statement. He goes, what are you trying to do, Jew me? And I said, what? And he repeated it. I said, really? I said, so what do you say when I'm not around? And quickly after that, we no longer became friends. But it's things like that. It's little digs like that that I'm learning to confront people on. And just, I agree with you, PJ, that there's some form of racism or cultural difference all around the world, and you just have to stand up and voice, and hopefully there will be a slow change, because right now, as my stepfather would say, the world is on fire. So what are you going to do? That's my story.
I suppose there's no other African-American female to speak except me now. So I will. Um, and of course, my story, my story has fragments of all of those that we've heard. You know, of course, growing up in the South and experiencing what I call everyday racism, the slights, the glares, you're out of your place, all of that. But my situation is a little bit unique. I grew up in a freedman's town. And for those of you that do not know, that is a town that was created and developed by freed slaves. And so when I was in the corporate world and going around, people say, well, Sandy, where are you from exactly? And I said, well, I'm from a town where everybody knows your name. Remember Cheers, that little mantra there, everybody knows your name. But they not only know your name, they know your mother's name, your father's name, and his father's name, and all of that. So I grew up in a protected environment in a tremendous sense of the word. I went to an all-Black high school, and we, at the beginning of every assembly, we sung the Negro National Anthem, and we were taught all of the basic fundamentals. Nobody called it that, but I know now that that's what it was. We were taught pride, we were taught dignity, we were taught honor, we were taught both in our home and in the schools, excuse me, that you don't let anybody define you. You decide what you would be. And my father, who had an 8th grade education, always said, or 6th or something, always said, I want you to go as far as you can go and be whatever you want to be. And don't let anybody tell you what you can't be. And no matter what they say or who they are, hold your head up, look them in the eye, and say what you got to say. Tell them what you want to tell them. They're a man, and that's all, or a woman, and that's all they are. They put their pants on one leg at a time, just like everybody else. Now, he would say, yes, sir. And he would say, no, sir. But that didn't mean anything. You hear me? When my oldest sister went to college, she was probably, we didn't know it then, but I'm probably considering that she was right up there next to genius. And he said, wherever you want to go to college, you can go. But just decide, because you're going. And she decided upon University of Texas. And when the banker in the next county over found out that my father's daughter was at University of Texas, and my father had an FHA loan on the house that we were living in. And I suppose that when he had a bad crop year, he was a farmer. And when he had a bad crop year or something, he went and asked for extra time just to extend to make the loan. Because when they didn't make the crop during the summer season, they would go and take different jobs during the winter season and catch themselves up. And then the whole process started over again. So I imagine that he went there to ask for an extension on the time to pay. And he said, no, definitely not. If you bring that little Black gal of yours home out of that white college and put her to work, you will be able to pay this loan and on time. And my father said, oh no, I can't do that, Mr. whatever his name is, because I want my child to have an education. He said, Martin, if she comes out of that school, she'll be good as my daughter. And my father said, well, that's exactly what my intention is. And I guess he said something that it shouldn't have been said, because my father got in his truck and drove 15, 20 miles home and got his gun, and it took my mother and 2 or 3 of his brothers and half the town to keep him from going back. So he said, yes, sir, but that by no means meant that he was complacent or compliant. He went along to get along, he did what he had to do. He respected everybody, white people, Black people, anybody, Hispanic. I remember the migrant workers came through every year to help us on the farm. And, you know, my father treated them like royalty, just as much as he would anybody else. So he taught us, they all taught us respect, and they taught us to honor, and they taught us to make our own way and decide what we wanted to be. And I remember so well, as we grew older, that I did learn just how much racism was out there. And I remember every now and then, even at University of Texas, when we would go to visit my older sister, they would have parades and they would be hanging a Black effigy down the main drag. I didn't know what a Black effigy was, but that's what they were. But I want you to know that over time, because my story, I'm probably got maybe a little more time on me than anybody here, so my story can be pretty long. But I want you to know that even in that same county, talk about time and how things have evolved. In that same county, I'm a deputy voter registrar, volunteer. And if you get the registration, the certification in one county in Texas, you can ask for the reciprocal in the next county. And you don't have to retake the test or anything. You just present your credentials and make the request. Well, I live in Fort Bend County. So Harris County said, okay, fine, you know, glad to have you, Brazoria said, oh, come on down, you know, we'll give it to you. And this same county where my father had to go get this, work with this loan officer, the lady says, well, I need you to come over and interview. And I said, well, why do I need to interview? She said, well, I need to make sure that I know that you know what you're doing. And then I need you to take the test again in my presence. And I said, well, I just took the test a couple of weeks ago, so it's really fresh on my mind. And I said, well, the Texas statute says that if I take it in one county, it's automatically reciprocal. And she said, she argued with me, I don't know why you would want to do it anyway. Well, I explained to her why I wanted to do it, because there are some areas of my community that fall in her county and don't even fall in the other county, even though they're in near geographic proximity. So she said, well, I don't think it's really necessary, but this is what you have to do. And I'm real busy, I can't even get to see you. And she had some exorbitant length of time. So I said, well, but I don't know why I have to take the test again. And she went on and on and on about asking me to justify it. And finally I said, I respect your wishes, but it's just not appropriate. It's a deviation from everything that I know. She said, well, if you respect it, then you just need to do it, because that's the only way you're gonna get it. So I told another lady about that, because we work on teams sometime, a Caucasian lady working with me. She said, I'm gonna go over there and see what I have. She went over there and she did ask her why she wanted it, but she got it and was in and out of there in 35 minutes. So I reported it back to my election office, and they said they would look into it. The lady said she would get back to me. Well, she never got back to me. So about 2 weeks ago, I asked her, did you ever check into that? And she said, oh, I remember now. She said, I meant to get back to you. She said, honey, one thing about it, that woman over there doesn't want anybody registering voters in her county. She does not want, and she certainly doesn't want anybody of color. She said, I said, I need you to put that in the email for me, please, because so I will have something to forward to the Secretary of State. Now, this was 2022. This was not 1898. This was not 1958. This was not 1968. So where the issues are alive and well, they are fostered and pruned and nurtured by people who want to keep them definitely that same way. And somebody says to me, and this is the end of my part, somebody says to me, how does it make you feel? What is your reaction to it? Well, we were never taught to, my mother always said, all white people are not bad and all Black people are not good. They taught us to take each person on the merit. So I don't really think of somebody's meanness and hatred or dislike. It really kind of doesn't matter. You have to work around it and you have to move through it. But as far as letting it change your life, I don't think it does. I think I work through them just like everybody else, one hurdle at a time, one challenge at a time. And when we get to the place that we understand, I'm talking about this is saying this philosophy now on a world that works for everyone. When we can get our arms around the fact that there's more that binds us than separates us, no matter what color. There are people in my family that look like Lisa and Reverend Jesse, and there are people, we don't have no blue blacks, Danielle, but you know what I mean. You know what I'm trying to say? It never comes up. I'm glad to see you. Here's a hug, pass the biscuits, you know? So when we realize, I believe, that we all bleed red, we all want the best for ourselves and our children. We all want to be at peace with our neighbors and our environment. We want to be happy. We want to see our children succeed. We want people to accept us for what we are. And that's what it all is. This fear stuff that's being thrown up, that we put our arms around and embrace, that is not the natural way. And I believe focusing on that is what is the detriment of all of us. I would like to know from the other members of the panel, what do you see and what have you experienced and what do you have to say? And when you have to say it, what happens and what's your experience?
For me, it started with stopping conversations, killing jokes before the punchline, things that were coming at me. I have a long story that I don't want to take up the time of this group or eat up the bandwidth to tell, but I come from the North and I grew up in I grew up in a neighborhood adjoining Harlem, neighborhood called Morningside Heights. 125th Street is the dividing line traditionally between Harlem and Morningside Heights. And I went to a school, as you know, that was founded by a biracial nun from Harlem who had to leave America, go to Canada, get her education, come back, went to the Bishop of New York, started an Episcopal school there. And we had kids from every country, just about, I mean, it was a small school. I don't know how many students, we had maybe 300 in the lower school. And in the high school or upper school, maybe 200, spread out over brownstones and stuff until they built one building there on 113th Street where everybody could meet. Well, so when I walked into first grade at this school, after some of those kids had been in kindergarten together, so they kind of knew each other, and it was made very clear to me that the smartest student in our class was Adaora Adamora, who was from West Africa. And she killed it through like 6th grade when they moved somewhere else. And I looked her up recently and she is, I think, preparing to retire as the chief of infectious disease medicine at the University of North Carolina Medical Center. So that was my experience as a little kid. And I grew up in a progressive white household where my mother was politically active with her party and stumped for Adam Clayton Powell and later for Shirley Chisholm. And so that was my, but here's the other side of it. I grew up in an atmosphere of white normativity and extreme privilege, particularly academic. We didn't have mounds of money, but I got the best education
Mhm.
in a tough city, academically. Hugely challenging. My mother was assistant to the president of Columbia University. We had professors, we had Nobel Prize winners, literally in and out of our lives. You'd run into these people on the street, or we'd have them over for, Christmas open house. And all of us had this feeling, I mean, even as a kid, there was this feeling that we were put on this earth to make things right, to do, to do good things. But there's a downside, as you 5 women of color know well, there's a downside to that, because you start thinking you're all that in a bag of chips. And Danielle and Denise brought up about sounding white, or sounding inappropriate, or something inside your own culture. And that's because there's this myth of there's a right way to speak. There's a higher form of music, there's a higher form of art, there's a higher form of literature, and there's a higher form of commercial engagement and all of this that all the peoples of the earth should aspire to.
Mhm.
And that creates, to me, the systemic racism and the cultural mess that we're in now, all of the ethnic division. And I got one more thing I want to say, and then I'll be quiet, which is, in a conversation with PJ and Sandy yesterday or the day before, when we were talking about prep for this, after the conversation, I got to thinking, and PJ made the comment to me, as she did on camera here at the start, that let's keep this about race, because when we're talking about justice, there's a lot of different places we could take that. It's absolutely right, And I got to thinking, every time something happens in the world, race gets moved to the back of the bus. Every time Russia invades Ukraine, or every time the Antarctic iceberg falls off, or whatever, it's another dumpster fire that has to be put out, and this whole conversation gets moved aside, and that is not right. And furthermore, what's going on in Ukraine, and what's going on with climate change, and what's going on in so many of these different areas can be tracked back to racism. Track back to xenophobia, track back to what is it that Russia's demanding from Ukraine? Make Russian the second language. Imagine if Canada invaded us and said, make French the second language. What's that about? That's an ethnic thing, isn't it? And where's the worst suffering in the world right now tonight because of climate change? It's not in Miami Beach. It's the Horn of Africa, where once again, millions are facing starvation. So that's kind of my rant on this. And so this conversation is so important on so many levels that are going to outlive us and are beyond what we had ever considered, as we see the world as one.
We have just a few minutes left, and I wish everybody would unmute and just make comments at will, because it really is an organic discussion. There's no prepared remarks or presentation, any of that. I was standing at work one evening, and we were just, how you kind of just stand around and you just shooting it with each other. And the 2 women I was there with at the time, one of them, they were talking about 2 other women who happened to be Black women. And one of them said, well, they're both Black. And I just froze in the moment. And I said, well, I'm Black. Oh, well, you're not like
They're
them.
different.
And you're and you this, and there was no way. How are you going to talk yourself out of that? And what was really striking is this particular woman who, oh, you're not like that. She is a student of truth. And it was very difficult for me to reconcile that, because racism just is so pervasive in our culture. It is the elephant in the room. We say we don't notice it. Oh, some of my best friends are, for lack of a better word, white. Okay. We hear that all the time when people want to justify how they treat Black people or the things they say about Black people. Oh, it's just my friends. But this is a discussion that we need to begin to open up because it is ugly. There's no other way we can put it. Who wants to respond to that?
Well, if you look at what's happening with the coverage of the war, it is purely based on whiteness. And especially, I was so outraged yesterday to hear about the 150 Haitians that came
Mhm.
to the US by a boat, that rickety old thing, and they deported them immediately.
Mhm.
And then the Cubans that came in also deported. It's like, so if you're, you know, white, you're all right. If you're brown, stick around. If you're Black, get back, kind of thing. Just it's really seeing it in action, and it's very painful. And there was a thing with a young Black girl, and it just broke my heart because she said, "Why do they hate us everywhere?
Mhm.
What did we do to make them hate us so much?" And
I'd li-
you know, yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to share that I was sharing with PJ that I moved recently, and I am so grateful to live where I live because it's quite diverse where I live now. Where I was living before was very isolated and very white. And so I am in an area now where I feel like I can embrace more of what we believe here and what we
Mhm.
talk about here than what was happening where I was. So I am honored and privileged to sit with you people tonight. Thank you very much for your
Hey, I do
honest
have a question. I have a
openness.
question, Lisa. Do we have any questions on
It-
Facebook?
No,
I-
but
I-
I do have a question. Would it be helpful to define the difference between racism and prejudice? Because especially coming on the heels of Danielle's comment, uh, because a lot of people want to throw off, well, you know, whites are racist and Blacks are racist, and anytime my goal is when people say, well, Blacks are racist, then I want to push back on that, saying they're not racist, they're prejudiced, because racist is built in a system of power,
Right.
and anybody can be prejudiced. I mean, I grew up in the deep South. Literally, if you take the state of Georgia and draw an X where the two lines meet, that's where I spent 10 years of my life. And when I left, I never looked back. There was one young man that I would have dated, but both of us had the understanding that the town would have burned to the ground before that would have happened. So that, you know, and I'm closing in on 50. You know, I'm not young, but I'm not so, but it's important to understand the difference between racism, which is power, and prejudice, which is ignorance. And something that Reverend Jesse said the other day about cities being more liberal because we rub up against each other.
Mhm.
And I think that's one of the things that is, it is important. And that's why I think that these soul sessions are so important, because we get to know each other on a human level.
No, I agree
know,
with you, Lisa. That's true. Because even going back to like Sandy, what she was saying as far as that banker and even that lady, when you were trying to register in your town, you know, they have power. So that's
Yes.
racism. That is
Yes.
racism in action. Whereas most of the conversations and most of the discussions we've had are about prejudice, because, you know, do those people have, other than their opinions and their little sphere of influence, you know, they have no power over you. They're not stopping you from being anything of who you are and how you are, other than making you feel some type of way just from their nasty rudeness. But when they have power over you, where they can inhibit you from developing and being at your full potential, that's when that's a racist situation. So thank you
Right.
for finding that like that. That's so true.
I agree with you.
All of us have had to sidestep those situations and navigate and step back and regroup or find an ally or change lanes or do something to navigate through. But you can't keep a good woman down. So, you know what I mean? You find
Amen.
another way. And then you're so divinely led sometimes by a power greater than you are. And when I write my life story, you will hear. But when it's though a force is leading you and holding you and making straight the way and removing obstacles. And so you still get where you want to go. And you don't really need anybody's consent, anybody's recommendation, but it just helps if they don't work so hard to inhibit and restrict you.
Yeah.
And they're not so mean-spirited about it. Do you know what I'm
Right.
trying to say?
Oh, yeah.
So did your sister graduate from the University of Texas?
Hell, yes. And then wrote her own program and graduated from UCLA, you know, and heck yes, we all did. Everybody in my father's family has advanced degrees, 2 or 3 of them, and we kicking butt.
Allow me to add something about your sister. Your sister sat for the licensing exam to be a religious science practitioner and scored the highest score in the country that year, or as far back as the people in that office could remember. They never tell me the scores. They just say pass, fail. That time they did.
I told her, I said, you could have just gone Texas, but you just kept the whole United States.
David, you are the only one who has not spoken.
Well, okay, a couple of things. You know, I asked Jesse, it was about a week ago, I think. I said, you know, are we preaching to the choir?
Yes.
And he said, probably. And then I started thinking about it. I started looking at it in science of mind, in new thought terms. And yeah, we may be preaching to the choir, but what we're also doing is we're preaching to the group race mind, you know, the human subconscious.
Yep.
So this conversation that we're all having tonight is impacting the whole race, you know, it's impacting the human race, you know. So I think in that sense, yeah, we are having an impact. Is it a big impact? I don't know. Probably nobody does, but we are having that impact. You know, I'm probably in a way the least qualified person to be on here because I did not grow up in the US. So I don't even have the perspective of a freaking white person growing up here, you know? But what I do have is I do have the perspective of being in a biracial marriage, you know, because my wife, Mayoki, is half Asian and she's half European, you know? And although she didn't personally experience a lot of racial prejudice, her parents did, and a lot of her relatives did. And just like you, Danielle, her, you know, the faces of her family are right across the spectrum, from people my color, you know, to really dark. So her mother told us, you know, different stories about how, you know, they were kind of racially prejudiced. But one thing I was really shocked to hear was that when one of her aunts was going to get married, she was going to get married to a Chinese guy, and one of the matriarchs in the family, who was part Indonesian, obviously, tried to persuade my wife's father, who was a policeman, to take his gun and chase the guy off because he was Chinese.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah.
So yeah, you know, you're right. All of you have been saying this kind of prejudice is across the world. But the biggest thing I think we need to get across the people is this, and you brought it up as well, Lisa, and other people have, you know, most white people do not realize that you're dealing with something that's systemic. It's built in, they really don't understand that it's built into the freaking system, and you have to change the system, you know? Yeah,
That's where the education should come in, and it's not so much up to us to try to educate them on that, because they just look at us as just whining.
Yeah, you're
And-
right, Denise. Yeah,
and
you're
That's-
right.
It's our job. It is our job. It is a
Absolutely.
system that was built to benefit us. And we're the ones who have to take it apart.
And also
So
on
how
that,
do you advocate? How do you advocate? How do you become an ally? Do you attack everyday racism when they take you out of turn in the line?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you respond when you see it happening to somebody else and not even, you're not even involved? And what happens when you do? With your friends, what happens when you take a stand or when you speak up, Jesse?
You pay something of a social price, depending on who and where you are. But you walk away strong, like you have walked away from insults with your head held high. You walk away knowing that you've done the right thing. This doesn't, as a man of, I was born in, since we're all saying our birthday, I was born in 55. So as a man of my age now, that kind of thing doesn't present itself as often as it did when I was younger, but it does from time to time, and you step in and you say something about it. And I think also what you do is you recognize that everybody has a story to tell. That's something that's so valuable about all of this. I tell you, I've gotten some pushback from people in truth, as PJ would say. Why do we have to talk about race? Why can't we all just get along? Why can't we just, everybody just sit down and be quiet? And because we're all one, and let's just, as Donald John Lewis puts it, let's just all sing Kumbaya together. And it's because outrages are still being perpetrated when people can't get loans on their houses, when people can't, when Sandy has to go through what she went through with the red tape about being the deputy election commissioner. As long as that's happening, as long as there's that injustice in the world, we can't just all kind of plaster it over with the oneness idea.
Oh, and the other thing that comes with standing up for someone you don't even know is the deal with the social thing. But more than that, hopefully there are witnesses. And if you show fearlessness like that as a white person, somehow it ripples.
Right.
yes,
And so that's what
That's
I
the
feel we need to
conversation.
do. Yes. Yeah.
Frequently, that's the
Well,
conversation. It's no, I'm not trying to convince my racist uncle, but I'm trying to convince
Right.
my cousins who are younger.
yes.
well,
You know,
that's,
So I'm
That-
gonna have that argument with my, not that I have, well, I don't know, but I've not had
Right.
that experience with a racist uncle. But yes, I'm gonna have the argument with my racist uncle. I'm not trying to change my racist uncle's mind. What I'm trying to do is convince my cousins who maybe haven't made up their mind.
well,
And we gotta do it on, on that level from personal all the way up to, we gotta look at the people that we're voting for.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
well, I think it starts with defining, like you said, Lisa, is what is prejudice? Because to me, the difference is if you realize what you think is just based on, like I said, prejudgment, and you're not willing to change that. See, to me, that's the start of racism.
Mhm.
So, I mean, and I think if you can start at that base and find out where they stand, because I've met a lot of racist people, and not a lot, but some people would be very surprised. I had a friend, and his father thought we were dating, never met him, just talked to him on the phone. He's gay. And I told him, I said, which one do you think your dad would prefer? That you date a Black woman or a gay man? And he's like, oh, that's a tough one. And it was funny because he used the N word one time, and that's when I found out. I said, your dad doesn't know that I'm Black, does he? And so it's things like that, because he really did like me, but he's never met me. And his question was, why won't Teddy bring you around? I would love to meet you. And I was like, well, sometimes kids try to protect their parents just like parents try to protect their kids.
And guess who's coming to dinner?
Exactly.
But most of the people,
and there's some people you can't, but you need to be able to identify who they are. So
Yeah.
that's why I start with the prejudice thing, because if it's just something that they were taught or they never really experienced, or if it's, just social, encounters, that could be changed. But if it's, the other encounter, then no, you're not going to be able to change their mind. So,
And I think this
Many
systemic
of the
thing.
people that I've worked with, these kinds of conversations in another church. Many of the people there, when we first began having roundtables and discussions, they said that they had definitely grown up in households that were staunch racists and, with very strong ideas. Their ideas changed, their personal ideas changed, either because they went to school with the other kids and got a mixture, or they went to college and got interaction and mingling with people in other races. And I believe that is really a big factor. And the powers that be that are working on divisiveness know this, and that's why they keep everybody as separate and antagonistic against each other as they possibly can. Because if we
Exactly.
start talking and find out that
Yeah.
we're all on the same page on some way, we just might get
Different.
yeah.
Yeah.
More alike than different.
Yeah.
We did get a comment, and the comment was, it's important for the deprogramming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
Yes.
That's true.
yeah. The
I tell you what,
deprogramming is,
go ahead, PJ.
well, real quickly, it goes deep in our culture. I don't know if y'all are old enough to remember the Average White Band,
Mhm.
and some of the music they had. They wouldn't put
Oh.
they wouldn't put their picture on the cover of their albums. And finally they called themselves the Average AWB was what they
Right.
called themselves at first. And it was some time before we found out they were the Average White Band. And then there was Tina Marie. It was a
Yeah.
long time before I knew Tina Marie was a white girl. She
Mhm.
sounded like she was black, and that was me. So deeply programmed in our culture. And then they called, what's his name, Justin Timberlake. I
Yeah.
could be wrong. So if somebody on Facebook bombs me out, they called him a WIGGA.
Yeah.
So I mean, and there's a name for that. So
Yeah.
it's systemic, it's cultural, and it's time to out it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Danielle.
Well, Charlie Pride, I mean, they didn't want him to have
Yeah.
There you go.
tours and stuff because of, that was a surprise. So,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It
Very much
was.
so.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Now, I was just gonna tell the story I had when I was in college. I met a woman, and I'm actually still friends with her on Facebook. Sweet, adorable white girl. Well, now woman, of course. Beautiful soul, beautiful spirit. She did not know. So she came from a family, just typical white family, did not go to school with anyone outside of her race, did not really speak to anyone until she got to college. And she called Black people colored.
Yeah.
That's what she had been taught,
Oh, yeah.
and we were colored. And she was fascinated with my hair, and she was fascinated with, and it wasn't a matter of disrespect. She genuinely did not know and did not understand, and was happy that I was a safe place to have that kind of conversation.
Right.
Because she would never want to offend anyone. She never wanted to hurt anyone, but at the same time, again, going back to that deprogramming, it's like, how do you ask these questions if there's nobody to ask them to? Who do you talk to about these type of things if there's no one to talk to, and everyone else in your family is telling you, shut up, sit down, we don't fool with those people because they're not our people or whatever, So how do you do that if you don't have any kind of interaction?
Right.
I want to have a conversation like this again with all of us because we're out of time, I know. And I'm sitting here, I've got 5 other things I want to bring up that I'm fascinated to hear. One of them is cultural appropriation, because you're talking about Tina Marie, and I'm thinking about Eminem at the Super Bowl. And how is that okay?
Well,
And
now
this-
it's not.
Yeah, was it
That-
okay for a while, but like now
Yeah,
it's not?
now it's not,
Okay.
right,
Yeah,
right, right.
yeah.
'Cause everybody remember Michael Bolton, remember how he,
Yeah.
how he,
Oh,
Yeah.
God.
how he appropriated
Well,
a lot of
But I
songs.
tell you what, too, when you talk about Eminem, Dr. Dre is the one who brought Eminem into
Yeah.
the music game. So he kind of got a pass because he was brought in through Dr. Dre.
Right.
Yeah, I
So
hear
it's
that.
like,
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's not like, I don't know if y'all remember back in the day, Vanilla Ice. Now,
Yes.
Vanilla Ice is
Oh,
a whole
yeah.
nother
Yeah.
situation,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
But like
He didn't have
Eminem's
any
got a little
credibility.
pass because he's Dr. Dre's guy. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
There was an article, and I need to go back and find it, and it was somebody in the country music industry, and the point of the article was the fact that music was segregated because a white guy figured out that he could make more money if he labeled this kind of music white music and this kind of music black music, because up until a certain point it was all the artists using the same, playing the same music, playing the same instrument, recording in the same studios, and then somebody went, oh, there's money to be made if we label it black or white.
Yes. Well, R&B and pop. I mean, there's such slight differences, you know?
Now,
Yeah, well, especially now. There's slight differences in almost every song, very slight. But you know, I mean, they're so, again, so much more similar than they are different. You know, just like human beings, just like Mioke said earlier, we're so much more the same than we are different.
Right,
But
okay.
we highlight those differences and make those, you know, be the main point of conversations and topics, when it really should be how much more are we the same. You know, human experience is human experience. I don't care what the color of your skin is. I don't care where you live. I don't care, you know, whether you're whatever. Human experience is human experience. We
Right.
all feel, we all eat, we all sleep, we all, you know, there are certain things that are universal, no matter if you are living here in Houston, Spring, Texas, or you're living across the world in, you know, New Zealand or Ukraine or Zimbabwe or Afghanistan or whatever the case may be. There are certain things that are universally the same, that we all crave, that we all want and need in our lives. And yet the conversation is always, how are we so different from one another?
yeah.
And by the way,
But that is by design. That's my point is
Separation.
that is totally by
Separation.
design.
Yes.
And I think, what's this man's name? The big heavyset guy that does all the movies, Michael something. Michael
Michael Moore.
Michael Moore.
Oh,
Moore.
Michael Moore. Yeah,
He
yeah.
did a major documentary on that. As a matter of fact, it's called Bowling for Columbine, if you
Yes.
watch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he has followed this and how this trend has been carried over into Canada and other places,
Mhm.
totally by the powers that wanted to make their point over here in the United States and are just hell-bent on doing so.
Yep.
Well, there's a school of thought among certain white people that if white people were to become the minority number-wise on the planet, that civilization would just collapse.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Because it's only our good taste and our precise speech and our background and so on that's keeping the whole thing up.
Oh.
Have you eaten our food? We don't have any taste.
No, I know. Especially the English, right, Dave? No, that's wrong.
hey, PJ, we need a moderator next time.
She did a fine job.
I think
Yeah.
she did great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Hey, Jesse,
Yes.
the national dish in Britain now is chicken tikka masala.
Yeah, I'm telling you, every street corner there's an Indian
Well,
restaurant.
Oh.
No, I mean,
Guys, I'm gonna have to leave. So,
It is
okay.
quarter after
Me
the
too.
Time for us
hour.
to get off anyway.
All
Yeah.
right.
all
All
right.
right. So
Love you all so much. Thank you.
thank you very
Okay.
much for joining us for this. We'll be up on
Hold
YouTube
on a minute.
later. Hang on and let me turn off the live. We will see you next time on these soul sessions.
Yeah.
Thank
All right.
you.
Right.